A very good afternoon to all the industry friends here. I am Raju Goel from ELCINA, which is the Electronic Industries Association of India. We are having a webinar today on the electronic components manufacturing scheme, which was launched, I think, on 8th of April, and then only a few days back, maybe a week back, it was finally the guidelines and all were announced by the minister. It has been quite a long journey for ELCINA, while we have been, pursuing along with our sister associations for this scheme. ELCINA has got, specific interest in this scheme because we represent the components industry, and we have always been, uh, pursuing with the government and with MeitY that please have a special scheme for components. And I think finally it is here. We have a scheme which is for components and for the passive components. The focus is on passive components. And we have also, government has also included modules in it, the display, module and the camera module, which are two very important parts of the value chain. So our main objective was that, this is also, I mean, a lot of it is low-hanging fruit, but still it was getting imported because it comes under the zero duty under ITA. And, most of it, why should I say most? I mean, I think almost maybe 70-80% of this particular segment gets imported. And that is a big cost to the country. It also impacts our sustainability and our our self-reliance, etc. So I think we are very happy on behalf of, the ELCINA, community and the ELCINA members and the industry at large that this scheme has come out. And we are looking forward to its very successful implementation. And this, webinar is just for this purpose. I think our sister association MeitY has already had one seminar on this, and this is a webinar. So I think we are expecting more people to join. We have, I think, 80 plus already. We hope that more will join just now. And I would also like to very warmly welcome Mr. Nirmod Kumar, who's the director for electronics at MeitY. He is actually, one of the authors of this scheme. Of course, we have worked with him, so we take some credit out of, from him always. But he has worked and he has burned the midnight oil along with his team to finally come out with this, because the scheme was also, it was resisted, I think, at many points because it was not clear as to whether it was really required, etc. But I think MeitY, we are grateful to MeitY for really having pushed it. We also have our president, Dr. Sasikumar Gendham, with us. Thank you, Dr. Shashi, for joining. And also special thanks to the teams from KPMG. We have Mr. Abhishek Jain and Ms. Sonam Bhandari. Welcome to both of you. And from EY, we have Mr. Saurabh Agarwal and Mr. Sukhpal Singh. So with those few words, I would like to request my president, Dr. Sasikumar Gendham, to please say a few words, and then we move on to Dr. Nirmod Kumar. So over to you, Shashi. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajuji. Thanks a lot. And first of all, very warm welcome, Nirmodji. And on behalf of the entire electronics fraternity, on behalf of ELCINA and also myself, I'd like to really thank you and the entire MeitY team for giving us such a wonderful policy framework for the very first time in its kind of promoting electronic components, which is the bedrock and the future for our stability and self-reliance for electronics. So thank you so much for that. I think this has been going on for a few years with a lot of deliberation between various functions of the industry, association, governments, and all the stakeholders. And again, first off, it's intensive stakeholder participation, and the scheme was announced. Thank you. It's now time for all of us to get into and make use of the policy to its fullest, and make sure that that we kind of get the best out of it. I mean, since this policy is coming after a long time. And today we are very eager to hear from you, the man himself behind the policy, like the architect, as we can say, helping us go through all of this. We are eagerly looking forward to hear from you and also rest of the industry colleagues as well, be it from KPMG, EY, and rest of the teams as well on their views. We will look forward, and thank you again, sir, for taking your time and for giving us the opportunity to hear you, the insights of the scheme and the nuances as such. Thank you again, and again, warm welcome to all the participants as well. I hope you will have a very insightful session. Please do not hesitate to leave your questions, and we'll try to answer as much as we can during the session. If not, we'll certainly get back post the session. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Mr. Goyal, you're on mute.
Sir, you are on mute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shashi, for those remarks, and I think we are all very excited about this scheme. I would now like to hand over to Shri Nirmod Kumar ji for his special remarks, his views on the scheme. What are the salient features he would like to share? I think all of us know him. I don't think there is anybody here who is not from the industry. But Nirmod Kumar ji has been a great support for the electronics manufacturing, the hardware, segment of the industry. And I think, sir, you've been now here for maybe over 5 years, and you've been implementing
3.5 years now.
more than 5 years, sir, right?
No,
3.5.
3.5 years.
3.5 years, okay. But you've done work worth more than 5 years, I can assure you. I think with some of these schemes which have come, I think the implementation of these schemes is really very, very critical, and it's very tough also. It's very challenging. It's very frustrating sometimes because companies apply and then they don't implement and all that. So we know all that. So we see both sides of the story. But with that, I will hand over to you, sir, please, for your remarks and for your talk, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajuji, and good afternoon, everyone. We will start from, electronics overview. We all know that electronics manufacturing worldwide is about $4.3 trillion. And out of $4.3 trillion, $1.8 trillion goes to the component. And in the case of component, about 99% trade deals through the global value chains. And if you talk about our country, we are computing less than 1% of that chunk. The reason behind it is from last 1 decade, we are growing significantly. And at this point of time, we are at the point of major transformation in electronics manufacturing. As we are moving towards the becoming global electronics manufacturing hub, our focus is not just on assembling the products, but we are focusing on building a strong self-reliant ecosystem. And for developing such self-reliant ecosystem, we have to focus on the design, development, prototyping, component manufacturing, and many more. So from last 10 years, we can see the assembly lead manufacturing was significant, and you can say it is in the explosive mode. And till 2019, when we notify the PLI for large-scale electronics, the import, export, and production are in the sync. Whatever the demand was there, some of it we are producing, some of it we are importing, and very minimum scale we were exporting. But after 2020, when we notify the PLI for large scale, the production has grown significantly. And the import for finished goods since last 5 years is almost significant, or rather it is declining mode. And the total import of electronics is increasing. It means that the component which contribute significantly in electronics import is increasing in the sync with the production of the finished goods. So we can say that in the last 1 decade, we have come up with the various program policies, including PLI, specs, phase manufacturing program, EMC for the infrastructure development, and the semiconductor program. So all these initiatives has impact on the production, but at the same time we are also saying that the component import was, increasing significantly in sync with the production, and it is as on date contributing about 60 to 70% of total electronics. So after analyzing those figures, we decided that we have to move in the value chain. Based upon the industry consultations, requests from the associations, and whatever the information was available with the industry association regarding the import, then the capability in the field of component manufacturing, we got to know that in 2023, we were producing about 15 million of the component, and our demand was approximately 50 to 55 billion dollar. And majorly these components are coming from China. So we can say that we are overly dependent upon China. And if we, imagine that in the case of COVID in 2019, where our manufacturing base was about $100 billion, at that point of time, there was a huge disruption. And we are planning to become $500 billion electronics manufacturing by 2030. If something like this happened at that point of time, it will create havoc. Further, to reach again to $500 billion electronics manufacturing, component has to contribute about $150 billion for it. And if the components are contributing about $150 billion, then the employment generation by 2030 would be 5 to 6 million people, and our export would also increase like 5 to 6 times. So these were the points in the mind when we were discussing about the component manufacturing scheme. But at the same time, in India, components are facing a very specific problem. The problem that we have to have demand. For having the demand, you have to focus on the scale of the finished goods, which will create the demand for them. If the demand is there for the component, then you have to have capability for the high-end component. But if you want to have the scale and capability, then you can't go with the same structure like MSAPs or specs or the PLI for large-scale electronics manufacturing, where we are having the flat incentive. So we decided that the new scheme would be designed after having the detailed discussion with the manufacturers itself. So before going to manufacturers, we analyze that, okay, we have to identify component first. So we base upon the import and the various segment like mobile phone, IT hardware, telecom, then auto electronics, pharma. We have analyzed all the finished goods. After analyzing, we come to know that all these sectors having some common component in sub-assemblies like passive component, that is SMD, non-SMD, PCB, then camera module, display assembly, lithium ion cells, and electromechanical components. So we identify these vertical. Further, we checked which particular subassembly and components are, heavily import dependent. Then we analyze their bill of material contribution. And further, we discuss with the industry that, okay, what is the investment required for each and every component or subassembly? So, based upon the discussion, we come to know that the Indian component manufacturing is, having challenge with respect to the high upfront capex requirement, then high investment to turnover ratio, long gestation period, and obviously no scale is there. Then the change of technology in manufacturing of the component, because on every 4 to 5 months the technology gets changed and it costs. So based upon these factors, challenges, we design the scheme, and this particular scheme is having the differentiated financial incentives based upon a particular characteristic of a particular component. We are providing a specific incentive. Then, apart from incentive, ministry is also working on the non-fiscal challenges faced by the industry in the manufacturing of the components. So, maybe in the due course of time, in 5 to 6 months, we will take a few initiatives which will make ease of doing business more simpler, and the issues which industry is facing with respect to the non-fiscal front, we will try to minimize it. So this scheme is mainly focused on the incentivizing the component. So for example, the first segment we choose is the display assembly and camera model. So display assembly is having investment to turnover ratio is 1 to 4. And the investment requirement for a single line to become viable is approximate 250 crore. Similarly, the camera model is having investment to turnover ratio is 1 to 3. So accordingly, we designed their incentive pattern. So if we see the incentive year over year in the camera model is a little more than the display assembly, because the investment requirement and investment to turnover ratio is different in the both the cases. Similarly, for the PCB, we categorize the PCB in the two part: high-end PCB like HDI, MSAP, flexible PCB, and the multi-layer PCB. So multi-layer PCB, we are having the different incentive structure, and for the HDI and MSAPs, we are having the different incentive structure, where we are also providing, along with the turnover link incentive, the Capex incentive, because the creation of capability for such high-end component require huge fund. So we are, providing 25% incentive on the plant and machinery, uh, post-commercial production. Similarly, we have focus on the localization. Like if you take example of lithium ion cell, we are saying that we are saying that if you are localizing the cathode active material, you would be eligible for additional incentive. And apart from this, we have mandated that you have to localize at least one thing over a year after the second year. It is also in the case of PCB, it is same the case with the lithium ion cells. But in the case of subassembly, we have not mandated any particular bill of material to be localized. We have mandated that you have to have few specific processes that has to be happen in the India. So this was the thought process, and based upon that, we have, framed this particular scheme. Again, we have a large target segment, that is supply chain. We are incentivizing supply chain for all the sub-assembly and component covered in the target segment A, B, and C by providing Capex incentive in the form of 25% on plant and machinery. So whatever the supply chain part, whomsoever is coming to assist a particular company, they will also be eligible for the incentive in this scheme. And the last but not least is the manufacturing, capital equipment manufacturing is also incentivized. Not only capital equipment, but parts and sub-assembly of capital equipment is also incentivized in this particular scheme. So this scheme is a holistic, approach, and it is covering all the components, sub-assemblies, and the supply chain ecosystem. Further, the budget for the scheme is about 23,000 crore, and we envisage that in the end of this scheme will produce about 4,56,000 crore worth of goods, and it will create about a lakh of employment. So this is all about the scheme and the reason, or concept, or whatever you can say, we have in the mind when we were formulating this scheme. So I will stop here and if any query you may ask, and that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that gives the vision, or the thought behind the conceptualization of the scheme and its broad contours, and also how the specific incentives were chosen, because I think that has been the hallmark of this scheme, is that MeitY has been able to focus on each segment and calibrate the incentive. So of course that is there, and I'm sure it'll attract a lot of investments in the scheme. So with that, we will now continue as we have KPMG and EY. So from what I see, I have some details of what they are going to present. So KPMG will be presenting more of the broader spectrum of the industry and the different schemes that have been announced earlier for the electronic sector, and maybe a little bit about the scheme. While secondly, EY will be sharing more of the details of the scheme. We will have some questions. There are one or two questions. Maybe before we start, maybe we can take just one or two questions, as Mr. Nirmod Kumar is there, for him to answer, and then maybe in 2 to 3 minutes we will continue, and then we will take the other questions at the end of the session. So there is one session, there's one question which says capital equipment and sub-assembly for manufacturing, which will be manufactured locally, are also incentivized.
Yeah, capital equipments and the sub-assemblies and component which goes to the capital equipment would be
Yes.
incentivized under this scheme.
Right, right.
And further, the minimum investment requirement for such investment is only 10 crore, not more than that.
Okay. So that is the threshold. But if
Yeah,
somebody
this is the threshold.
wants,
There's threshold, and if anybody want to make more investment, there is no issue.
that is also there. One or two more questions I will just take, and then we will move on to KPMG. One question is, we are assembling live PO4 cells to form lithium battery packs. Will this be covered?
No.
Specific questions.
So lithium ion cell, manufacturing of lithium ion cell is covered, but no pack or battery is covered under this scheme.
Okay, the assembly of the battery pack is not covered, but the lithium ion cells are covered.
Manufacturing of lithium ion cell is covered,
Right.
but manufacturing the battery pack from the lithium ion cell is not covered.
Right. Okay. So one more last question. The rest we will take up later on, or metal and plastic enclosures are covered under this scheme. I think the answer is yes. Right, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are covered, but I think they are covered only for IT products and maybe mobiles.
So enclosure for the mobile, for IT hardware on related devices, related devices are covered. It
Okay.
also include the enclosure for the sub-assemblies and the components.
Okay. Okay. So there are more questions, sir, but we will wait, I think, for the presentations from KPMG and EY, and then we will take them up at the end of the session. So first to go is KPMG, and we have Mr. Abhishek Jain, who's a partner and national head indirect tax and fiscal incentives practice of KPMG, and Ms. Sonam Bhandari. She is a chartered accountant. She's also part of the KPMG team. So over to you, Abhishek ji, and to Ms. Sonam.
Thank you, Raju ji. Hi, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to all the participants. Thank you, first of all, to ELCINA for inviting us and giving us an opportunity to present. And thank you, Nirmod ji, for your valuable insights and giving us the background and the overall context and objective of the scheme. Quickly, I think as you rightly mentioned, the objective is to increase domestic value addition of electronic components, bring more and more investments into this space in India, introduce self-dependency and enhance exports, and generate employment and manufacturing of these products. As you rightly mentioned, the overall budget of this scheme is 23,000 crore, and that is for the industry players to apply and take this benefit. The overall percentage benefits, as per our analysis, for people who would manufacture under this scheme, is roughly about 35 to 50%. Now, that's a huge incentive to be taken, which will completely sort of change the return on investment on most of these manufacturing projects. I just wanted to add that in addition to these benefits under the PLI scheme, which is, of course, a central government scheme, most of the states or each of the states have benefits under the state industrial policy, where the state governments again give a lot of benefits in different forms and shape. This also could range between 45 to 55%. And then there are benefits under the customs and GST laws for any new manufacturing investments that are set up. Now, total of all this put together, the benefits could even be up to 80 to 100%. Now, if that is the benefit that the government is offering, I think there can be no better occasion for the industry players to come and explore this scheme and put up investments into India. Also, the current geopolitical situation, and we all know that because of the tariffs imposed by the US government. More and more companies after COVID supply chain disruptions are looking at diversifying their supply chains and having more than one or two countries added to their manufacturing and supply chain. And I think these two, this scheme plus the US imposed tariffs, I think these twin factors brings India in a very, very sweet spot to attract these investments for people to come and manufacture in India. That's the overall objective that I wanted to present. I'll request my colleague Sonam to take the more details of this scheme.
No, thank you so much, Abhishek. So very quickly, coming to the key statistics of the electronics component sector. So I'll probably not spend a lot of time discussing this because I think Mr. Kumar covered it pretty much in detail now. Broadly, to put in the electronics market size today, and we've excluded the consumer electronics for once. This is approximately $2,900 billion. And of that, today, India's market size is $169 billion. So if you see a breakup of this $169 billion, it is essentially the production in India in FY24. And then we've added the import of electronics minus the exports of electronics, which is plus $89 billion on the left, minus $35 billion. So that's the approximate India market size which exists today. The EMS market size, which is the currently developed one, that's approximately $1,038 billion. And then the India market size is $33 billion. So that's broadly an overview of the market. Today, the export of electronics in FY24 was $35 billion. Now, the import has been $89 billion, which is largely, I think, as Mr. Kumar was mentioning, this is largely components still. The finished goods have still stagnated specifically after the 2020 launch of the PLI for large-scale electronics. And after that, we've seen a gradual decrease or only a stagnation. And electronic components still continues to be a significant chunk of this imports, and that's the reason why the scheme was there. And today we are all discussing the scheme here. The domestic demand we talk of from a consumer electronics, mobile phones, and industrial electronics perspective, it's $51.2 billion. This industry, again, there are varied data points. 15 to 17% CAGR is what we've generally seen. And if we are talking of a range of FY21 to 24, then that's broadly the CAGR that's existent in the domestic production of electronic goods. So that's a broad level overview of the electronic component market. We can get into more details, but right now, this time we'll focus more on the scheme. So if we just go back, and I think already Mr. Kumar spoke of some bit of the journey that has happened back from probably 2012, and Sir started from 2020, but we could go probably 8 years back as well, when this whole electronics focus had started. So 2012 started with a scheme called MSAPs, which gave away a 25% Capex subsidy. Couple of products were covered in the electronic space. There were a couple of products from the renewable energy space and others which needed that kind of push to come for manufacturing in India. And then from 2012, a very similar scheme was launched in 2020, which was the SPEC scheme that again gave away 25% of Capex subsidy only. These schemes have generally been there for 5 years. MSAPs was initially there for 10 years, and then in the second tranche for 5 years, and then SPECs also was there for 5 years. And then the focus moved more to a turnover linked incentive. So if we see MSAPs and SPECs, that was again a Capex linked incentive. Both of them were broadly 25%. And then we moved to a more turnover linked incentive where 2020 started with PLI for large scale electronics. Large scale electronics essentially covered mobile phones and specified electronic components. And that's why we see there is some bit of an overlap between the components that were covered then under the large scale electronics also and the focus in this scheme as well. Excuse me. That was in 2020, and then 2021, we saw a wide range of other schemes. We saw PLI for telecom components, then we saw for IT hardware 1.0, and then we saw white goods. White goods was essentially components for air conditioners and LEDs. And then 2023, we saw a relaunch of IT hardware as well, where a second window had opened, PLI for IT hardware 2.0. And then 2025, that we are today in, this is the ECMS scheme, which has, for majority of the components, we still have a turnover linked incentive. And then there are components for which we have a hybrid incentive where you could take a combination of the turnover linked incentive and the Capex incentive. And then there is another set of products where you have a purely Capex linked incentive. So that's broadly what happened under the ECMS scheme. So this is the journey really, how we've moved this path. What we've done is, and we'll not spend a lot of time talking of this, but what we've done in this slide is, along with the finished goods from the time the journey started, there was a focus to also include some of the components. But obviously then the focus was more on finished goods. But because components were also included, there is an overlap between the component inclusions then and some of the components even today being included when there is an exclusive scheme for electronic components. So what we've done in this slide is really tried and covered which of these components were covered under all of these schemes or in some of these schemes, and how we've panned this process. So like if we talk of a display module subassembly, it was covered under specs and it was covered under PLI IT hardware. But again, this under this scheme, it's a new launch. So that's the way how this has to be done, and we'll share this slide with you. So you could probably just have a look at, if you're keen to look at the kind of journey that has happened for these components in the past. Quickly moving to the next slide. Now this is broadly covering the scheme as to what it is. I think some bit of it Mr. Kumar has already covered, but if I have to just cover those points which were not covered, the outlay of the scheme is 22,919 crores. The scheme was notified on 8th of April, but the detailed guidelines were out on 26th of April. These somewhere become relevant to compute timelines in terms of when your investment will start get computed or included, etc. So that's why these two dates again hold some bit of relevance here. So the total outlay is 22,919, and then there'll be some admin costs. So the incentive outlay proposed is 22,805 crores, of which if we see for the target segment A, B, and C, and let's just hold this for a moment. We'll probably go to the next slide and we'll talk about what are these target segments A, B, C, D. But unlike other schemes, it's not a prescription that a particular target will only have this much. There is still a clubbing to say that A, B, and C, which are the major components, that has a target outlay of 21,093 crores. And then there is a pure play Capex linked incentive, which is again 25% only, which has parts, components, subassembly, parts, components, and capital goods. That is 1,712 crores. So the entire outlay has been defined into these two buckets only. Now, here I'll just pause into, and Mr. Kumar, you could also intervene to explain this. So here to just mention, the scheme is very unique in the sense that earlier, under all the approvals which were granted, what would happen is there was a budget capping on every particular category and also a budget capping per applicant or otherwise how it would be disbursed. This scheme will purely work on a FIFO scheme. So approvals may be hundreds, but what will happen is that as soon as a particular company comes in or an applicant comes and claims the benefit, the budget will keep reducing. And as soon as the budget exhausts, nobody else gets the benefit, irrespective of whether you've been approved or non-approved. So time is of real essence here. We'll have to, even if you got the approval, that doesn't mean you'll get the disbursement. You'll have to be really quick. If somebody else acts quicker in the journey, that person gets the incentive. Mr. Kumar, would you want to mention something or I proceed?
No, you are right that we have to disburse this 22,919 crore, but whomsoever come first will get disbursed.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. So the tenure of the scheme is 6 years with a 1-year gestation period that's there. So you still have a possibility of choosing 25-26 as your base year and start claiming incentives only from 26-27. Or if you're already ready, you can start claiming in from 25-26 only for 6 years. So the tenure of the scheme remains as 6 years. Kinds of incentive we've spoken of. There are broadly three kinds of schemes that we're talking of. One is a pure play turnover linked incentive. And then we have a hybrid incentive, which is turnover plus Capex. And then we have a Capex incentive. That's broadly what it is. When I go to the next slide, I'll probably explain in terms of which segment covers what kind of incentives. And then Saurabh and Sukhpal will cover more in detail in terms of what kind of processes are covered and thresholds, etc. There are 4 target segments that we have: sub-assemblies, bare components, specified bare components, and supply chain, which I'll get into in the next slide. The good part is that the government is still trying to acknowledge that there was a spec scheme which was there, and there were people who were approved under the scheme but couldn't be granted, or the applications couldn't be approved because of a budget constraint. So that's the reason what the government has done is that if the products are covered under the ECMS scheme, then those applicants get migrated. So if you were acknowledged under the spec scheme but were not approved because there was no budget, then you could still continue to seek incentives under this scheme, and your investments made for the purpose of specs will still be continued here or counted here. Last but not the least, I think a very, very strong message here that there is a strong push on employment generation. So not that there is a threshold that no, you will have to do this much, but what has been done is if you achieve the kind of thresholds that have been anticipated by the government in the scheme, then you get that additional 1% or 5% slash 1% or 5% will be reduced, and that will only be disbursed to you if you actually meet the threshold employments. So that's the way how the employment thing works. So that's a broad overview of the scheme. So very quickly, as we were speaking in the past slide as well, there are essentially 4 major components that we're talking of. So 4 target segments, but if because this will become very important, so let me explain one thing here. You will have to file 1 application per target segment. Okay. So not that there are 4 target segments, these are the 4 broad categories of target segments, but the total target segments are actually 11 target segments. So if we read from display module to going till capital goods, these are 11 in number. So each of these is a separate target segment, and each application will be filed per target segment only. Now, why I'm just probably spending another minute to talk on this is because this particular scheme, while doesn't penalize a bank guarantee being revoked or a bank guarantee being in cash, but the scheme talks to say that if you don't meet the kind of commitments that you're talking of, and I'll get into the details of what commitments, then your approval can be revoked, and then when your approval is revoked, it's revoked at a target segment level. So say you were to apply for a particular product under the non-SMD passive component, and you had applied for 4 products, but you did not meet the targets for a particular product, you will actually be debarred for incentives under the entire target segment only. So that's why it becomes a very important factor here. Now I have to talk broadly of what we are covering here. Sub-assemblies covers display module, sub-assembly, and camera module sub-assembly. Broadly, these are the components covered. Under bare components, we have non-SMD passive components, and under selected bare components, which has a higher threshold, but again, comparatively higher benefits, that's the SMD passive components. Non-SMD passive components broadly covers resistors, capacitors, ferrites, inductors, coils. These are the products that are covered. These are said to be those products, and this is not an exhaustive list. It still writes to say etc. So there is an interpretation where there'll be a governing council who will again go back to see as to whether these products align with the kind of products that were envisaged or not, and then approvals could be granted. But these necessarily have to be for electronic applications. So that's an important term. Purposefully, the term electronic applications has not been defined under this scheme, so that there could be a flexibility in terms of how that is looked at, and governing council will take a call at each point in time. But just to mention, electronic components in the electronic application in the past was defined under the spec scheme, at least to mean a particular application on which a PCB is used. But that may have some influence, but that's not the only interpretation to be drawn for electronic applications. So hence, there may be slight bit of still flexibility in terms of the interpretation. Electromechanical products that I've talked about, that covers speakers, microphones, relays, switches, connectors, heat sinks, etc. And then we have multi-layer PCBs covered under bare components, and under selected bare components, which is the hybrid incentive part, that covers the HDI and flexible PCBs. Then we have lithium-ion cells, and we have enclosures for mobile IT hardware products. All of these covered under the bare components. Selected bare components covers the HDI flexible MSAP PCBs. And then we have SMD passive components, which is the same as the non-SMD passive components. The difference is really non-SMD and SMD here. And then we have benefits which are there for parts components, which is, I think, a question which was just asked as well. So parts components are covered under the Capex scheme. And then you have capital goods as well covered under the Capex scheme. So just in a minute, the first two, which is sub-assemblies and bare components, that purely covers a turnover-linked incentive, which could start from anywhere at 10% and then tapers down to 1%. Again, for each product, it is defined variedly, and that's the way how it will be. For selected bare components, we have a combination, which is called a hybrid incentive, where you could claim PLI as well as the Capex incentive. And then the third one is purely Capex incentive. In the interest of time, I'll quickly move. Probably just very quickly, I'm not getting into the absolute details here. The first one, very important, that the applicant has to be a company or a LLP. Okay. Second, you have an option to select the base year as 24-25 or 25-26, whichever you want to, but your group company sales also of the particular target product will be added. Next, employment will be seen as an average employment only. Eligible investment, I'll just spend a minute. Plant and machinery is included. R&D is included. TOT, transfer of technology, is included. But what is not included is land and building, consumables, and raw material. I just wanted to spend 1 minute to just mention certain specific things here. Furniture, office furniture is not included. So it has to be only as plant and machinery, only then it's included. Used machinery, unlike other schemes, doesn't have a capping here. It's allowed to any tune, but the shelf life of the particular machine has to still be 5 years when you're procuring them. Thankfully, we've had practical instances where packaging, freight, etc. were restricted to 7.5% under specs, at least, even if it was not in the policy, but practically we had those concerns. This scheme explicitly states that it will be restricted to 7.5%. In-house R&D will be included. Employee cost still is not included under the in-house R&D category. Last, quickly, separate applications, this part I've covered. Qualification criteria is still okay. It's more based on the global ESDM revenue, which Saurabh and Sukhpal will cover. Penal provisions, bank guarantee is not required. That's the good part. As I mentioned, that it could be revoked in a scenario where whenever there is an evaluation, if you don't make the first year investment or you don't make 50% of the investment that is needed whenever the inquiry happens in that particular year, then this application could be revoked or your approval could be revoked. Contract manufacturing is not allowed at all. It's a complete no-no, irrespective of what is the quantum of process. Job work is allowed, but it can't be a significant part of the manufacturing. QRR is very important. Unlike other schemes where a QRR has still been flexible on, this scheme, the expectation is that QRRs are going to be monitored very, very particularly, specifically if the penal provisions have to be invoked. So that's the way how it will be monitored. That's broadly what we've wanting to cover. That's the broad gamut of the contours of the scheme. I think the details of each of the target segment will be covered here. Yeah, that's about us.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonam and Abhishek. Moving across to few of the slides which we have, while broadly, I think our colleagues have already covered major part of it. I think while we are pushing the slides, few important things which are emerging out. If you look at the market today, the way the market is, we need to be cautious of the fact that during this tariff era, if you talk about today, our market is around $86 billion, which is expected to be around $350 billion by 2031. I'm just throwing some numbers now. $455 billion is what is the consumer electronics, which has been imported by US from China, Mexico, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Malaysia. The smartphones was the major part of it, $126.7 billion. Assembly and circuits, around $43.7 billion. TV monitor, around $25.3 billion, and batteries, 23.9, power units, and converter, 23.4. It's important to understand that just from a US standpoint, $90.9 billion USD components have been imported by US, of which $50 billion have been from Taiwan and balance from other countries. And these are those components which are covered under this scheme. What does it entail? It entails one of the biggest opportunity for the country during this particular tariff era. When we talk about, next slide, when we talk about the fact that today our cost disability in the assembly side is around 10 to 14% and component manufacturing is around 14 to 18%. With China having a tariff of around 145 to 245%. And of course, even if it is milded, and if we expect around a 15-20% variation in tariffs compared to that of India, India today is at 26%. Of course, it's all suspended and everyone is at 10% today. Vietnam again is on the higher side. I'm sure Vietnam will also get into a better frame, and more or less India or Vietnam will be at par, or maybe Vietnam will be a bit better than India. Thailand at 36%, Taiwan at 32%. It entails a big time opportunity for India. While ECMS was not planned at that time when the tariff was to come, but what it entails is that clearly this disability on the assembly side 10 to 14% and on component manufacturing side of around 14 to 18%. If I use a combination of PLI plus I add the tariff disadvantage which is likely to happen to China, I think it's a big opportunity for the Indian electronics industry. Next. Now, when I look at from an ecosystem standpoint and the value chain perspective, if you look at, we can divide it into 6 broad baskets when it comes to the overall product value chain. On the product design and development, I think we are moderately there. I think as Indians, we have been doing a lot of design electronics on product base for OEMs. Component manufacturing and sourcing is something which still we have a lot of things to do. PCB assembly, I think a lot of SMT lines have come. We have been doing a moderately well over there. Box build, I think we have been good in terms of box build, in terms of testing logistics and after sales service. And I think this scheme, what it will entail is to ensure that we do some bit of more catching up on the component manufacturing and sourcing side. Next. Now, when we look at from a scheme overview perspective, I'll hand it over to my colleague Sukhpal to take it forward from here. Sukhpal, over to you.
Hello. Yeah. So I will discuss in detail. Like, hello.
Yes, it is okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now it's okay.
There is a slight echo in your voice, but it's not bad. Maybe you can try again.
Just a second.
थोड़ा speaker खुला. No, not because of that. Oh, yeah, I think he is having some echo there. So let me just chip in for him. Go to slide 7. Yeah. So when I look at this particular piece, what is coming out, and of course, Sonam and Abhishek covered part of it. So I'll primarily focus on those items which are not covered so far. I think the employment criteria which has been given under the category D, which is the target segment D, I think appears to be a bit on the higher side, which is around 10, which is one person per 1 crore of investment. I think, of course, they have said that it needs to be looked into. But if that be the criteria, I think somewhere, I think we need to be mindful of the same. Another important question which is emerging from the industry time and again is that what will be the date? I think our colleagues did talk about how the overall journey in the electronics incentive space has been. If you look at from an MSAP standpoint, it was date of approval. After the date of approval, when you used to get the invoice, only that investment used to be counted. Under specs, it was date of acknowledgement, which was when you got the acknowledgement from the nodal agency or the project management agency, that particular investment was counted. Under this scheme, it is from the date of notification. Now, there has been a confusion as to what is the date of notification. Is it 8th April, 26th April or 1st May? It is 8th April. So any investment which is being made on or after 8th April is getting covered. Why I focused upon employment is because if you don't meet the employment criteria, there is a cut of 1% in case of a turnover linked incentive scheme. And in case of a Capex incentive scheme, there is a cut of 5%. Next. When we look at from an overall incentive standpoint, what is coming across is that there is a ceiling of 50%, which has already been spoken about. It's very important to understand that there have been a bifurcation which has been given for target segment A, B, C as 21,093 and target segment D as 1712. What is being also said is if the budget is left out in one of the segments, that is fungible across. How that fungibility will be defined? Based on the approvals given or based on the claims which come into play? That's something which is a question which is not clear, at least so far. Another important point which is coming across is on the application. So application, as our colleagues talked about, that it is per target segment one application. Somewhere in the scheme, it is also covering that there can be a revision into the scheme or revision into the application, and that particular revision can be done by paying a fee over there. So assuming that the window of the scheme is over and then if at all there is a revision, will that revision be counted? Or maybe is the revision only for the target segment D, where there can be a revision subsequently because there is a 2-year timeline which has been given under that particular scheme. So that's an important point to be covered. Next. When we look at from a target segment standpoint, it's important to understand that the target segments which are being covered over here, broadly, if I have to say, while the segments have been given on this particular slide, which all type of consumer electronics are getting covered? I think any components which are covered on this particular screen going into mobile, consumer electronics, IT hardware, telecom, and to some extent into even automotive is something which is getting covered. At least that's our reading of how the things are looking out to us. At the same time, the question which keeps on coming, so there are 11 segments which have been talked about. There can be, can I file multiple applications under one target segment? So say, for example, it's a target segment of non-surface mount devices. Can I file one application for each of the products referred over here? So assuming I want to do 5 products under this particular target segment, can I have 5 such applications? I think somewhere that particular clarity has to be there. Or can I file only one application in that particular target segment for a particular product? Next. Moving across this particular part, I think, Supal, you want to talk about how the impact is coming across on the SDI PCB and the other type of PCB.
Yeah, hi. So as we see that in the component categories, there are 2 types of PCBs which is getting covered. The one is a multi-layer printed circuit board, which is in category B, bare components. And the another is the same sort of a category which is coming in selected bare components, which is a high density interconnect HDI, modified semi-additive process, and a flexible PCBs. Now in the guidelines, it has been clarified that in case both the goods are being manufactured and the applicant has been approved under the multi-layer PCB, then the sales of even the flexible PCB will be incentivized as per the rates of the multi-layer PCBs. So that is on the PCBs front.
So another important point which is emerging in case of target segment D, assuming I am doing an investment into a plant which is capable of manufacturing both the eligible product as well as ineligible product. At least on the lithium-ion cell part, they have the clarification is there that it has to be pro rata. But in case of a Capex subsidy, what will happen if I'm producing both eligible as well as a non-eligible product? In that particular case, whether the pro rata will apply? I'm assuming a pro rata will apply. Now the pro rata will apply only for the financial year in which I am doing the commercial production, or it will be looked into for the next 6 years. Or it will be looked into from an installed capacity perspective, because that particular clarification will change many of the things. So that's something in the target segment D, which we feel is very important for us to understand. And I can just give an example over there. If we look at maybe, say, cathode material. A cathode material can be used for consumer electronic lithium-ion cell. Similar cathode material can be used for a mobility or a energy storage related cell manufacturing as well. Now I am supplying to both. Now in this case, how will I determine that how much of my investment will be factored towards the one compared to the other? Will it be on the first financial year in which I am doing the turnover after commencement of commercial production, or it has to be looked into from 5-6 years perspective, or from the installed capacity perspective, is something which needs to be looked into. Next.
Yeah. Now, coming to some other criteria for the product eligibility. As far as the display module sub-assembly is concerned, it has been clarified that the entire manufacturing process has to be in India, and especially the film on glass and the chip on glass processes has to be done in India to avail the incentives. And the mere assembly will not be incentivized. So if a person is doing only somewhat of a processing over that particular material, and the entire processing has been done outside India or overseas, then that particular item will not be incentivized. Similarly, for the camera module assembly, they have clarified that the entire sub-assembly, including the surface mounting of component and the front of line processes and the end of line processes, has to be done in India. If a mere assembly is being done in India, it will not be incentivized. For the multi-layer PCBs, what has been clarified is that from second year onwards, there has to be at least one component which should be localized in order to be eligible under the scheme. As far as the enclosures are concerned, though it has been spoken at length by my fellow colleagues, I would just want to mention that the finishing and decoration should also be part of the processing when you are eligible for the enclosures.
Next.
Yeah. Now coming to the lithium-ion cells. Lithium-ion cells. So lithium-ion cells, it has been specified that the lithium-ion cells should be only manufactured for digital application, storage, and mobility has been excluded. What you can manufacture is at most 10,000 mAh battery that you can produce, and from second year onwards, at least one of the component has to be localized. So this is all for the product eligibility in some products. Again, some other relevant criteria which could be relevant is that in a lithium-ion cell, if you are manufacturing lithium-ion cell for mobility or the storage, and you are manufacturing the same for some digital application, then you have to pro rata. On the basis of pro rata, the entire capital has to be pro rata has to be done on the entire capital investment.
So this is a very important point. See, assuming there is a front loading of investment which is happening, and in the first year, my sale towards the consumer electronic business is very high, then will it be looked into year-wise pro rata as to what is my turnover year-wise and the investment which I have done year-wise, or will it has to be done pro rata based on 5-6 years, which is the entire period of the scheme, to look into what has been my sales? Because if it has to be looked at as a holistically for 5-6 years, then of course from an investment standpoint, we are not clear as to how to count that investment as eligible investment towards the scheme.
Now, there has been some other criteria for the lithium-ion cell and multi-layer PCBs. What has been clarified is that the applicant has to localize their components at any time during the incentive year. The localization in excess of one part may be considered as a compliance for the subsequent years. So, suppose in a particular year, 2 component has been localized, that particular excess component will be considered as a compliance for the subsequent year. The component localization date will be determined by the date by the first sale or invoice of the target segment in which that particular item has been localized. Once the part is localized, the sales target will be eligible for incentive only if the particular item has been used in their manufacturing process in the subsequent years. Multi-layer PCB and HDI PCB I spoke about, that in case you are manufacturing both and you are approved under the multi-layer PCB, then even the sales of HDI PCB will be counted towards the incentives of the multi-layer PCB. It is important to note that there are some qualification criteria which has been given for the target segment A, B, and C. So what has been done as they are saying that the revenue for the year 23-24, if it is for the global consolidated ESDM revenue of that particular company, then it has to be 250 crores for the display and for the camera module assembly, 50 crores each for the non-SMD passive components, electromechanicals and multi-layer PCB, and 250 crores for the enclosure lithium-ion cells and others. Now, what they have said that in case you have a ESDM revenue, then it has to be taken together on a global level, and then you have to see whether you are meeting that particular range or not. And in case you don't have a ESDM revenue, then you have to see your manufacturing revenue. That could be other than ESDM as well. And there the criteria is that you have to meet the 750 crores each in display and camera module, 150 crores in non-SMD electromechanical multi-layer PCB, 750 in lithium-ion cells. So that is how the broad consideration has been given to the qualification criteria. Now, there is some qualification criteria, at least for the target segment D, which is saying that the applicant's proposed investment should meet at least the investment threshold criteria, which is 10 crores. That is the minimum you have to achieve. Then they will also evaluate a particular applicant based on their financial capability, which they will be seeing by seeing your net worth, which should not be older than 31st March 24. The net worth of the applicant is very important, that it has to be more than or equal to the 50% of the proposed investment. In case he is not able to meet that 50% criteria, then the applicant shall submit a board resolution saying that for the committed investment and a source of funding. That is for the target segment B. Some general criteria, though it has been spoken, but I'll just touch upon on this. So the green field and the brown field, even the existing and the new investment will be incentivized under the target segments. Separate application has to be filed for each target segment product to be submitted.
So, one important point which is coming across is which says that governing council to review the technological and financial capability for selection of applicants under the scheme. Is that something to semiconductor scheme wherein they will look into, or it will be looked into whether you have a technology available with you or not? What is your net worth? Of course, net worth is being talked about at a category target segment D. Then what will happen in case of A, B, and C? If I'm just meeting the eligibility criteria, then will that technology and financial capability is something which will be a subjective thing, or there will be some more FAQ or guidelines which will be released? I think we do have Nirmod Kumar sir with us. Maybe as a part of a lot of questions which are coming, we can ask from him as to what will happen in this particular case as well. Next.
Now coming to the last slide. So there are some processes which has been given in the guidelines. The first one is on the, of course, the filing of the application. The application has to be done through the online portal. The project management agency will review those and appraise those applications. And once they are done with their evaluation, they will submit their recommendations to the governing council. Governing council will ultimately take the decision on the approvals or approvals. The second is on the, it's very important, it's on the determination of baseline sales. In most of the PLIs, this was one of the main important steps, is to finalize your baseline. They will actually review your baseline sales, and once they are okay with your baseline sales, they will give you a letter saying that this has been your baseline. Again, similarly, some QRRs also needs to be filed within 30 days from the end of each quarter. The third one is that disbursement of incentives. The incentives will be submitted on an annual basis, and based on conducting the visits as well as appraising the claims, the recommendation will go to the governing council, who will ultimately take the decision on the disbursement of the claims. On the review front, I think Sonam has spoken about it, that though there is no specified penalties or furnishing of bank guarantee as such is not there, but governing council has the power to see if they found there is no investment or investment is very sluggish, then they might revoke the approval letter. And even in case you are meeting the investment, but the sales is not up to the mark, then also they can revoke the license.
I think one point which is not clear is, again, in the target segment D, do I need to file a QRR over there as well? Of course, as we go down into details, we'll get to know over a period of time as to how it will work out, because target segment D, you are getting only the capital subsidy, which will be as soon as you do a commercial production. Next. So that's all from our end. Maybe back to ELCINA team to take up the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much,